Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It is me, Francis, and I have with me once again, Jack Forman. Jack has been on the podcast a few times. He is one of our producer extraordinaires out there in Seattle.
Ooh.
Jack, how are you doing?
I'm better now that I'm an extraordinaire. Man, I feel like every time I talk to you, I just get like one extra level. You're
just ranking up through the podcast.
As you can see behind me right now, I'm working on this star chart, and I've got, my extraordinaire star is now filled. So thank you for that.
You put it right on one of your many guitars you have going on back there.
Yeah. First, we were using it as a potty chart for me. But now that I've mastered that skill, I just crossed out potty and I replaced it with podcast. Most of the letters are the same.
There you go. One way or another, you're really showing your range as a human being. Not only can you use the toilet, but also you can be on a podcast.
Honestly, the content I'm producing is similar in both cases. So.
The ringing endorsement of the many podcasts that Nate works on.
Oh, no, just my part.
Well, Jack reached out to me because it is November 6th, and it is America, and it is a little upside for today. Today is the 4-year anniversary that I retired from the military. So
no kidding.
Yeah. So
Mazel tov. That's exciting. Wow.
Thumbs up for me doing 20 years and 4 months. To get out. Yeah. So other than that, happy news. We have sad news too, probably for most of the people who are listening. Donald Trump won the presidency again. And
wow.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great for, the many people who I know who are not straight white middle class males. Literally everybody else is going to go through another rough time here. And we kind of did this once upon a time. And my wife and I were discussing in 2016 when Trump was first elected, the next day on Kids Place Live, the radio station you used to work on, everybody seemed to be playing music that was very just like, hey guys, don't worry, we're gonna get through this together. Because the radio station can't necessarily be political, but I just don't really think a lot of hard right wing Republicans are listening to the music of Lucy Calandrelli and Laurie Hendricks and you and all these it's mostly talk radio, I'm sure. So I feel that back then there was kind of that, and now as you and I both have kids, that your children are 13 and 10, my daughter is 9 years old.
Yeah.
You have to kind of have these conversations. And before we go into the conversations, I was thinking back to when I was about, that age, 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah.
1992, when Bill Clinton was elected.
Right.
And my parents, I don't really remember having conversations about politics with my parents. And I don't know if back then it wasn't as crazy and insane as things are today, 30 plus years ago, but that just, those conversations didn't happen. And it feels like nowadays though, politics is such a ingrained part of everything. You can't really escape it, especially if you go on the internet.
Oh, for sure.
Yesterday I logged completely out of Twitter after everything. I was like, I'm not dealing with this.
Only 2 years overdue on that move, by the way.
I know. I was holding out hope. I was hoping, and I dashed against the breakers, but that's fine. I'm having those come to Jesus moments. I think a lot of it. I have a big following on Twitter, so I just feel like I have to hold on to that, and it's it's not really necessary. I don't think so. But with politics now, and with having 2 kids yourself that are in the purview of being knowledgeable and understanding and knowing what's going on, what conversations are you having? How do you have this conversation with your kids?
Man, you raised such a good point so I'm a little bit older than you, and I'm just doing the math here. I was also a little bit older than you in 1992. I think that's how that works.
That's usually how the progression of time works.
I think that's right. I was a sophomore in high school in 1992, so I was pretty online in terms of world events. Less so in 1988 when Elder Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, succeeded the 8 Reagan years and became president. But I feel like that, I was in middle school then, or maybe, I think that's right. Yeah, I think I was in 6th grade that year in 1988. So that was probably equivalent to how old you were in 1992.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
And also a very consequential presidential election.
Yeah. And right. And I mean, we were in Kuwait, 18 months after that. A lot of stuff happened. But similarly, I was aware of what was going on in the world thanks to CNN. I feel like maybe back then that was the first time that there had been round the clock coverage. I'll never forget watching getting that, night vision view of what Desert Storm looked like in 1990 or whatever year that was. And that was a pretty novel thing. And it was also not a very hyper-partisan time, as you say. Like, this is pre-Rush Limbaugh. This is the Fairness Doctrine, I think, was still in effect. The cable news network boom hadn't taken off, and certainly the internet was, still just a little kernel in Al Gore's brain. He hadn't fully invented it yet at that point. He was still tinkering.
It was still ARPANET. We weren't on our Prodigy sites yet. We were,
right. Yeah,
2600 baud modems and everything. We weren't quite to the level of online that we are today.
Yeah. So for people yours and my age, we don't have, unless we lived in a hyper-partisan household, which I think were pretty rare in those days, we probably don't have really models at all of what adults act like in our current political zeitgeist. Like, we can't think back and remember what our parents or caregivers used to do, 30 years ago when we were of similar age to our kids are now, and use that as a template, because the entire landscape has changed so much. I mean, like today, my son, we went to an election party last night, and everyone who was there in one way or another was very much present and crushed in 2016. Sure. Most of those people were at our house that year. We intentionally did not throw an election party this year because I felt like we jinxed it.
Yeah. So you let somebody else jinx it this time.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. And they jinxed. They did it.
It's your fault this time, not my fault.
So my kids had a busy night last night, but we kind of popped in and out of this party, just kind of checking in and seeing. And we all went to bed pretty early last night without a clear, definitive picture, but everyone kind of felt the way things were going. So this morning, my wife mentioned it to my 13-year-old son at breakfast, and I wasn't sure if she had done that. I was still getting ready. So as I walked him to the train to go to school, I brought it up like, hey, man, Trump won. He's like, yeah, I know, Mom told me. And I was like, how are you feeling about it? And, we had an interesting 5 or 10 minute conversation on the walk. A few minutes later, after I got back and I was now walking my 10-year-old daughter to school, I was like, hey, so about the election last night. And she's like, yeah, I know. I asked Alexa. Trump won. So she was in the bathroom taking her shower, and she asked our Echo Dot the answer. So she was already online too.
The bathroom Echo in there? Like,
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I was going to make fun of you for it, but I can understand wanting to play music in the shower or something.
Oh, it's the best. Oh, yeah.
Let me tell you something that we discovered that might help people out. The dark shower, where you take a shower in the dark and maybe just like light a candle or two.
Oh, yeah.
And also take the shower beer in there with you. We use electric candles because otherwise our daughter goes in there and dumps water onto the candles to put them out. No matter how many times we're like, don't do that, you're ruining the candle. She's like, yeah, but I have impulse control problems, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it.
Oh, this is like when Korean families lay out like a whole bunch of things in front of a baby and wait to watch where they crawl. Right. And that's like an indication of maybe what their future is going to be. Like, clearly your daughter's going to be a firefighter. It's so obvious.
Well, she also likes starting the fire, so I'm not sure how that's going to go for her. She's not the firebug that, every adolescent boy is, thankfully, but we're working on it.
Yeah. She's a sort of a catch and release firefighter.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just the fact that my 10-year-old daughter was able to glean information about the election cycle without me being a part of it, and she just independently got there. There's a, really quick temperature check of how much the world has changed since I was 10 years old watching, or being aware of election results coming in. But I guess, first of all, I think any of us who were around for 2016 and watched that happen probably walked into this election with some apprehension. And at least for me, like that, deep feeling of hubris of last time that this happened, of like, oh yeah, we got this.
Certainly, we wouldn't do this again. Look what he's saying. Look what he's doing. Look at the, listen to the words that come out of his mouth. And, you kind of realize, I guess I realize, everybody's on a different internet.
Oh, for sure.
My wife and I always talk about that, like just based on the ads we're served. Like when we're playing a mobile game, or if you're, online on any website, the ads that get served are a little bit different. So like there's probably this entire swath of America getting served things that I've never seen.
Right.
And so you get caught in this just like, well, certainly we wouldn't do this again. Like certainly we couldn't be this insane. And, having the conversations with my daughter and saying, we try to keep things neutral, but it's hard to when one guy is just an abject racist and horrible human being. And it's very easy to say, look, these are the problems with it. And now we get to do the thing where, everybody asks, how could this happen? And you get to pull the big, the rolly sheet down that shows the last like 2,000 years of human civilization election and pointing out, like, we've always elected assholes. It seems to be a problem that we have. Like, no matter where you are or what you're doing, occasionally a good one gets in, but for the most part, this is just kind of what happens. And I'm not going to go into the many reasons or the wherefores, the why-tos, because that's going to be debated by people for years and years, and honestly, I don't care. What's done is done. We're just going to have to kind of head down and move into whatever's coming next. And those conversations, that we have with our daughter, and luckily in Missouri, we had a couple of good things happen. We passed the abortion access bill.
Yeah.
Slim margin, but we got there, and nobody took away recreational marijuana, so I guess I'll be okay. But, for the most part, it is now not just a discussion about the election, but it's now going to be a discussion about the next 4 years and things that are happening. And, like, how much do you really, expose your kids to in a political landscape, I guess is going to be the question.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, from having been through this myself, 2016, other years, I remember the election being called in 2000. And I mean, that was such a world-shaking change just to even understand how that could have gone down, Bush, Gore. But I've also been through many election cycles as a teacher. And, generally the developmentally appropriate rule about how to approach world events with kids is, first of all, start from a powerful position, which is, what do you know? Or what have you heard? Or what do you think? And engaging kids with that and letting them own the narrative rather than just being like, hey, good morning, here's all the bad news. Because from a kid's perspective, if they are conscious enough of what these things might mean or might do, they're not coming from a terribly empowered place. They're living in a world that is basically out of their control. They're reliant on adults for so many things, constantly asking questions to reframe the world of how everything does or doesn't make sense. And to suddenly just be hit with like, hey, here's all the bad news, and hey, guess what? There's nothing you can do about it. It's not a constructive place at all, and it's not a learning place, and it immediately puts kids in like a helpless amygdala kind of space. So that strategy of starting with like, so what have you heard? And, what are you thinking about? And answering questions as they come up, but not leading with answers, because, this was the case when I was on Kids Place Live. We never led with the news because it's such a developmentally wide audience. There's such a range of perspectives and readiness for information from all the kid listeners. But even with your own kid, like, you might think you know where they are, but they've never encountered an election as a 9-year-old or as a 13-year-old, and they've never seen an election framed in the way that this one has been in the zeitgeist. So starting with like, how are you feeling and what are you thinking, I think is such a powerful place to start. And being objective, but also trying to not, at least in my experience, lead with the emotional content of what all these things mean, which is really hard to do. I mean, especially if you're in front of the news a lot, or if the TV's on and, you're driving your kid somewhere and NPR's going and all these bad nouns are coming through. Like, it's sort of hard to stand in the way of those things. So trying to start from very small concepts and let them grow as much as they need to, rather than starting with the really big thing and then letting it trickle down. I guess it's just a different strategy.
Yeah. And that is kind of one that we take with our daughter. We actually, if I'm going to plug something real quick, there's a magazine that my daughter gets called The Week Junior. And if you're interested in, after I describe this, if you're interested in it, hit me up, because I can, help you get a subscription to this. We're doing subscription through the Girl Scouts, but The Week Junior is a weekly magazine that comes, and it is for kids specifically. And it has news, it has sports, it has news around the world, it has games, it has, the podcast of the week or the app of the week, game of the week, things like that. And it's very simple and it's very neutral toned. Like, they cover politics and they cover Kamala and Donald Trump. And when you read through it, it is not a rallying against one or the other. Right. It is a, here are the facts. Here are some of the things that Trump says he wants to do. Here are some of the things Kamala says she wants to do. Here is, maybe some reasons why these are good or bad, but it gives you a very, I don't want to say dumbed down, but simplified, which is something that I feel like a lot of people are missing.
Oh, sure.
To just get simple news, like news that isn't being tainted with opinion or news that isn't being fanatically thrown out there because they need your eyes for ad views, right? Like it's a magazine. You can interact with it as much or as little as you want. And my wife and I read through it all the time. Like we get it, and we both like to go through it because it has that great ability to give you news and give you the updates of what's going on in the world without it yelling at you, without it being preachy, without you feeling like somebody is trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
Which is really great. You know, it's the only news periodical that we get in the house, really. And my daughter loves it because all kids love getting mail. So, you know,
totally.
So, you know, she gets that, she gets highlights, and she gets the Missouri Conservation magazine has a kids version called Explore. So she gets all of those, and that's where she gets a lot of her news. We don't let her go onto YouTube, especially unsupervised. We keep her, for the most part, away from the internet, and she is extremely happy about that.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't go to a traditional school. We homeschool, so when she has downtime, she goes and she picks up a book because she has hundreds of books, and she's got a Kindle that's got hundreds of books, and she's got a tablet that's got another, more hundreds of books on them, through Libby and Hoopla. Yesterday, my wife and daughter spent the entire day at a new library because that's one of their favorite places to go. So I feel like, and I understand I come from a privileged place to be able to do this, and it's very nice that I don't have to listen to Roblox, but I do have to listen. I have to listen to a lot of Pokemon, though, which is an up and down because I played Pokemon as a kid. And so my daughter's just like, oh, you play Pokemon. We could talk about Pokemon. I'm like, I know 151 Pokemon, and that's it. And there are thousands of them now. And I don't know any of the ones you're talking about.
Well, that's what happened. We caught them all. So they just had to keep growing.
I caught them all. And then Game Freak is just like, no. You can't just catch them all. There's more to catch now.
Well, after you catch them all, like they got locked in a closet. And you know what happens when you put like a couple of, feral bunnies in a closet. You open that closet back and there are thousands of rabbits in there. So same thing.
A bunch of bunnies.
Let's just say Squirtle got busy.
Yeah. We have had that. She has a book that has every Pokemon in it, and it's funny because the book is called like the Super Ultra Mega Deluxe Pokemon Guide, and they just have to keep, like, every time there's new Pokemon added, they have to add another descriptor of big to it.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So she's got like two versions of it, and one of them is missing one of the descriptives because the next one has all of the, like, I don't know, the mega Pokemon or whatever that she's into right now. So I'm not keeping up with it. I don't play Pokemon anymore. She doesn't even play Pokemon. She just reads manga. She doesn't even play the games. She doesn't want to play video games. She just wants to read Pokemon manga and then have me read them. And Jack, they are incredibly boring.
Oh, man.
They're not made for a 41-year-old man. They're made for 9-year-olds.
Yeah. I love, by the way, like that, as you were describing that compendium that just keeps growing, it's like the term paper that you turn in, and the file name is like fall quarter term paper final update, still even more final update, version 3 final. This is the final doc.
Yeah. The multiple works in progress.
It reminds me, by the way, the week junior and, getting your information from books at home. It reminds me, do you remember that guy, James Holtzhauser, who was like the second Jeopardy champion? He was like making a run at the Ken Jennings record, and he won I don't think he won the greatest number of episodes, but he won the most money. And his strategy was he would go to children's sections of libraries and just cram every book there. So he got just enough information from every book. Like he, didn't read like the biography of Frida Kahlo written, for adults, but he read the picture book about Frida Kahlo like 4 times and had all that salient information. And he just did this with everything. So he has like a 32-page deep font of knowledge about every topic that's ever been written about.
Only on an 11-year-old's level.
Well, it's TV. That's perfect.
Right. Which is now making it like all the people are like, oh, I watch smart TV, like Jeopardy. You don't. You watch something. You're getting asked questions for 12-year-olds.
It worked for him, man. Yeah, maybe I should start reading The Week Junior.
I would highly suggest. Like I said, hit me up if you're out there and you're interested in that. You can get something through my daughter for Girl Scouts.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, nice. And so it doesn't also, you don't have the empty calories of eating that many Thin Mints.
There are snacks too. There's like nuts and little chocolates
magazine?
and things like that. Not in the mag. Also, like there are also, you can get magazine subscriptions, but you can also get snacks because it's treats and reads. So you can get treats or
treats and reads. Okay, fair enough. I'm sold on this. I mean, basically, the Week Junior is what I can tell from what it seems like. That's what Jeff Bezos is trying to do to the Washington Post. So it's kind of the same premise, just to strip away all opinion. These are all just factual pieces of information.
That might not be a bad idea, though. Like, if news got away from somebody who makes way too much money has a dumb opinion, and now you're putting it in my face. If that could go away, and I mean, I'm doing that. I've logged off. So like, if you just don't give them the ability to put it in your face, it turns out you're a lot happier and more normal going forward. At least I hope so. I hope that I can start repairing my brain after this and go back to reading books and doing Sudokus.
Yeah, I purposefully did not turn my phone on after 9:15 last night. I checked one time this morning, not out of deference to my knowledge, but just because I knew I would have to talk to kids this morning before they went to school about election results. So I spent exactly 30 seconds on the New York Times homepage and like, okay, there we go, and click. And I've not been on the internet now for 4 waking hours, which, I mean, I know what's there. I know exactly the narratives that are there and how much angst is written into every page. And I gotta say, I'm sort of enjoying just not being in all that friction right this moment. I'll get there.
And you know, somebody sent me an email, and I think you're a great person to kind of help parse this out, about somebody who's like, I want to become a dad, but I just don't know about, you know, the landscape that we're in, if this is a good time to be bringing a child in, but also just the concept of like having to bear witness, right? Like, I'm watching, you know, what's happening in Gaza, or I'm watching what's happening in the United States, and all these things that are like giving you psychic damage, right? Like absolutely breaking your brain. And there's no reason for that, I don't feel. Like, people have a concern that if they're not bearing witness, if they're not seeing these things, then they'll stop caring about them.
Right.
But I don't think that staring at a computer screen or staring at your phone and being sad and depressed is gonna do anything. Like, so far this morning, you know, we're recording this podcast. My wife is updating all the signage on our little free library to have more inclusive languages and everything, because we live in a very multicultural neighborhood. We have Hispanic, we have Afghan, we have West African people all living on our street, you know, just up and down the street.
Yeah.
So we're doing these things that like we know make us feel better and, you know, are helpful, maybe not on a huge scale, but on a local scale. You know, this is this conversation we're having here. People are going to listen to this and, you know, hopefully have some good takeaways about how to talk about things with your kids and how to, you know, broach these topics of discussion. But, you know, I want to get your take on this too, about like, I'm done having kids. I'm 41. I know you're older and you're probably done having kids too, but like, is this kind of one of those like climate change and politics and this, that, and the other thing? I can't bring a kid into this world because everything is terrible. That just seems, I don't know, it seems short-sighted.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if people had thought that many generations ago, we wouldn't have had a Gandhi or a Malala or a Greta Thunberg, or, I mean, we've had really important leaders through the years who began their work when they were young. So yeah, I think it's short-sighted, but I completely agree with you that it is counterintuitive to bear witness to trauma. Because I think anyone who is death scrolled or doom scrolled knows that feeling, particularly from January of 2017 through January 6th of 2021. It was, I mean, I feel like I wish I could have gotten steps from how many times I moved my thumb on my Twitter app, just scrolling through everything. But I definitely got to a point where it was like, yes, it's important to be informed, and it's important to know what's either happening wrong or what needs to be happening in the world, but not because somehow you're repairing it just by being completely destroyed by knowing about it. It's so you know how you can help. The whole point of knowing about current events in the world is knowing where is reality not meeting expectation. And then hopefully, if you're an empathetic person and you care about your community, figuring out what are my puzzle pieces and could they fill some of these gaps between reality and expectations. And it's really hard to be that puzzle piece that fills in the gap if you have no energy because you're depressed about world events, if your energy sapped, if you've just gotten used to coming home and spending 4 hours, you know, reclined, just groaning and scrolling, like, yeah.
And posting.
In microcosm, you know, we've talked a lot about my previous job at Kids Place Live on Sirius XM. It was going very well. I really enjoyed that job, and I got laid off as part of a larger major layoff company-wide. It completely blindsided me. I didn't see it coming. And I realized pretty early that I had a choice to make. I either could just sort of wallow in all these things are out of my control and how unjust I thought the decision was, or I could create a list of all the ways that I could actually contribute my energy into the world and hopefully, use it in better ways than companies that don't care about the people that they're employing. So that's why I now, volunteer at our local food bank doing food rescues at the grocery store and building tiny homes at the tiny home factory here in Seattle.
And doing podcasts, coming here. Like I will never tell you that posting is praxis, but it's important to have these kinds of voices. I'm not going to tell you that everything's going to be fine and hunky dory, but there are things that you can do, and that is like at last night as my wife and I started seeing everything kind of go down the tubes, we were immediately thinking, all right, like what do we need to do to change things up? Like first one, log out, log off the internet. When it comes to the podcast, I don't want to focus too much on Twitter. I want to do more YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and things like that. In what ways can we, can you get this out there more, but also how can we locally do something? And, food bank and tiny homes are great things that are out there that people can do. Or we also have always been like, we don't like volunteering is just not our thing because it takes time and effort. And if I can just give you $50 though, I'll give you $50.
Yeah, totally.
Like if I can just donate, money to you, I'm happy to do that too. So whatever it is, but like find something that makes you happy and do it, because otherwise you're just gonna keep spiraling, and that's not gonna be helpful. Like for your own mental health, but also for the world at large, it's not really gonna do anything positive.
Yeah, and let's bring it back to kids too, because I led with this premise of this powerless feeling that kids have when they're taught about world events that they have no control over, and all the feelings. Representative democracy can feel very similar to that too. This powerlessness that my ballot did pretty well here in Washington State and here in Seattle. Most of the things I voted for went well on the national scale. Well, there's a big one that didn't go the way that I wanted it to, and I'm feeling pretty powerless about that. But
come move to Missouri and try it.
Oh, you tell me about it. No, thank you. But there are so many ways to be powerful and, just simply to be the change. I mean, if there are so many ways that you can counter that narrative, which is an easy to understand narrative. It's really hard living in a huge society like ours. And it is true that we are, one of hundreds of millions. There's not a lot of power as a single person on that scale to change national events, especially if you're not even of voting age. But there's a ton of power if what you're doing is niched and local and connected to your immediate surroundings. There are so many ways that you actually really can enact exactly the kinds of, mission and feeling forward work that you would hope are happening on the larger scale. And what a great thing to share with your kids too. I mean, we didn't do that so much after the 2016 election because my kids were super young. My daughter was 2, my son was 5. We were still just coming out of babyhood and figuring out how to keep all of our upholstery dry around the house. That was our big goal.
still changing diapers. I remember that time. Yeah, I don't want to go back to it either.
Elementary age kids, though, they can do so much. And, what better way to counter that powerless narrative than actually doing things together and planfully executing ideas that represent values. That's really important.
Yeah. And I mean, talk to your kids, as you said, ask them what they would like to do, not just how do you feel about this? Do you want to talk about it? But, what's something positive that you think that we can do here and move forward and do that to feel better? Like it's not necessarily self-care, but in a big way, it's not to take a bath in the dark with a beer in your hand, but it is a way of like, what are the things that I can do to just make me whole body feel better? Not just, physically, but also mentally, and not just resting, but doing something that is forward thinking and positive and involving your kids, not just be like, hey, we're going to go do this, but say, here's some things that we can do. Would you like to do any of these? Are there, or do you have any ideas? Have those conversations with your kids, especially if they're like, I'd say like 6, 7 years old and upwards, those are the ways that you can really help them feel more empowered. And a more empowered child, I feel, becomes an empowered adult.
Oh, exactly.
And instead of these things being passive events that just happen to you that you get to participate just a little bit in, you get to go and you get to vote and you get to check a box and you can say, cool, that's great. I'll see you guys again in 4 years, but, something that is more empowering and more positive that will, hopefully launch your kids further as they grow older to continue these acts and this way of thinking of like, how do I make this better for me? How do I make this better for everybody else? Because my parents are fantastic people. They always have been. They still are. God bless my 80-year-old parents who have never had cable in their entire life and have never wanted it.
Whoa.
I know. I'm so lucky because my father is very left-leaning and most of his siblings are not. So I got lucky on that one.
Yeah, really.
But, we didn't volunteer. We didn't do, I didn't. My father did. My father's a gardener and he worked at a volunteer garden all the time and he was always trying to drag me along to do it too. And I did sometimes and, sometimes I didn't because I was a teenager and I didn't want to go work in a garden with my dad because that's some nerd nonsense. I'm not doing that. But as I grew older, I learned to appreciate those things and I learned to appreciate that my father was always like every Saturday morning, 7:00, he was in the truck. He had woken me up and dragged me along. We would stop off and get breakfast somewhere and then we get to the garden and we'd start working on stuff. He'd just be like, all right, here's stuff that we need to do. We need to go get the tools out of the shed that's over there. We need to, turn these, we're pulling these sweet potatoes up. We're doing this, we're doing that. And it just gives you that like, we didn't have the depression rectangle that we have now called our phones, but it's a way, it was a perfect way to like get away from everything else and also just see the positivity that you were doing in the community. Cause like it was a garden that was in North City, St. Louis, which is our most impoverished area. So you got to watch this garden on this gigantic lot get big and you got to see the food be given away to people who needed it. And that was always, at the time it didn't really mean much to me, but as I got older, I understand that better and I have a much bigger appreciation for that. And I want to continue to do that. That's, it's just now where do you find the time to cram it in? Because I've got, a job, a family. My dad didn't have a podcast that he had to record 2 to 3 times a week.
He did it on wax cylinders, right?
Yeah. Flip the record over so we can listen to the other half of the podcast.
That's a great idea. I don't know. To your earlier question, the email about how could I ever bring a kid into this world knowing, the state of things. I mean, that is a narrative-based question, meaning like the state of the world is, if you were to zoom out from our world to the galaxy as a whole, the state of our world is completely something that we've concocted here on planet Earth. The state of our world is that we're still spinning around the sun. Not to discount like the very real horrors and traumas and dangers. I mean, climate change is such a ridiculous existential threat. The kinds of social upheaval and unrest and lack of equity. I mean, these are all really real things. These things are so unbelievably magnified, though, by media discourse. Speaking of media discourse, I heard an NPR story a couple of days ago about how HR departments are dealing with political disagreements in the workplace because of there's apparently every day $2 billion in lost productivity as a function
of people arguing about politics.
Yeah,
Ugh.
because they're finding, and I'm sure there's some metric they use for this, they're finding is that every negative interaction that someone has with a colleague leads to on average 31 minutes of distress, like measurable. There's a measurable 31 minutes that it takes for a person to fully process all the emotional content of what they've been through and finally get back to, putting their nose to the grindstone. Meaning like these little, and these are tiny little antecedent moments, like just little disagreements, like, a 30-second argument can suddenly derail your next half hour or more, maybe ruin your whole day. I mean, we are narrative creatures. Humans have been telling stories since we could draw paintings on caves, 100,000 years ago. We are moved by stories, and we've chosen with our depression rectangles and our news cycle to adopt those stories and let those ones be the overriding thing that's guiding every part of our days. Whereas like if you have a kid, that like you could spend 4 hours with your toddler learning like what happens when you lie down on grass, and seeing like how that messes with your skin, like all those little grass impressions, like getting your hands dirty, seeing amazing things like petting a goat. Like as a parent, all of that narrative goes away. Their narrative is through your kid's eyes, you're seeing this unbelievably tender and real connection that you and your child are having together, where their eyes are so wide open looking at you for any guidance you can give them, and they're absorbing your values and the things you care about like a sponge. So if you care about the world and you think that all of these very real threats are problematic and things that I wish the world cared more about, you definitely should be having kids and passing that information on, because if you're of childbearing age now, you're old. You don't have that 19-year-old vigor, you know? You got to sleep like 8 or 9 hours a night. Like your knees are giving out.
Yeah, you gotta do it before the kids can outrun you.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Man, I hurt my back a couple weeks ago doing nothing. My back just seized up for 3 days for zero reason.
Sometimes you just wake up and like, cool, my neck's gonna hurt for a week now.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I have that saying, like, I asked somebody one time, what if our grandparents felt that way in 1939? You know, looking down the barrel of World War II, like, oh, I just don't know if I can bring a kid in this world. Of course not. They banged like crazy. And then after the war, they even more. That's where we get our baby boom from.
Yeah.
The world has always been shit. Like, when I was a kid, acid rain in the hole in the ozone was going to kill us all. And then...
Oh, yeah.
Right? What happened to that? We fixed it. Like, I'm not saying that we're going to, like, fix climate change, but maybe your kid can. I just think that, like, you got to stop reading all of the doom and gloom and think about what kind of future do you want to see for not just America, but just the world in general. And that's where you make your decision. Like, do I want to have a kid so I can pass this on? So I can say, hey, I want you to be a compassionate person. I want you to be somebody who takes care of yourself and takes care of other people. And you know what? Sometimes kids disappoint you. I'm not going to lie. But for the most part, if you're a good parent and, you know, you will be able to impart those things and hopefully create a better world going forward.
Yeah. And that kid that you're wavering on whether or not to have now in 18 years is going to be voting in their first presidential election.
Exactly.
And doing a whole lot of potentially good in the meantime, too. And I mean, you said it earlier, and I'll say it again. I think there is probably a measurable number of people listening right now who are thinking the words, check your privilege. And I think that's also true. I mean, it's very easy. First of all, none of us have felt the effects of this new presidency because it hasn't started yet. It's going to start in 2 or 3 more months. So it's very easy for you and me to have this tune right now when we're not necessarily crunched under what could be stratospheric change. That said, I think the principles are still true that you change the things that you can, you work toward the changes that you can make, and you understand that there are some things that are above your pay grade, whether you want them to be or not. There were a lot of really great things that would have come out of Trump not winning this presidency. I'm not going to lie. And some of his closest enablers in Congress. Golly, we really had a really nice opportunity to clear the table. As a nation, it seems that we didn't.
Nope.
So, you know, you react to what the game looks like now rather than, 4 years of lamenting what it could have been.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for emailing me with this idea. I am all about, the emergency podcast. So
we pulled the ripcord.
Yeah, it's just, I've never done this. I've always been very scheduled. Be like, no, let's do a podcast right now about kids and elections and everything. Like, yes, I do. I definitely want to do that. So I will keep this in my back pocket of, hey, Jack, do you want to record? I know you're not doing anything at 10 o'clock in the morning. So
yeah, that'll be really interesting to see what breaking news gets the bat phone ringing. Like, Jack, Carrot Top's in the hospital. We got to talk about this.
Hey, don't mess with the top. He's the man at Luxor, and he deserves all of the prop comedy king, who is also ripped as hell, like just disgustingly veiny. It's phenomenal. I love him.
I watched a really great YouTube video recently of Carrot Top recounting his very weird experiences with Gallagher, who was sort of Carrot Top's predecessor.
Yeah. Two weird guys talking about how weird the other guy is.
But Carrot Top comes out looking like a pretty cogent, lucid dude. Like, he knows what he is. He knows what he's doing. And his depiction of Gallagher, well, that's worth Googling. I recommend people watch that. Very nice.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Jack, thank you for coming on and discussing this with me. Love having your opinion and your take on things, because you've got such a unique experience, not only as a father but as a teacher and as a guy who hosted a kids show for 11 years. You are like the Uber dad. So
wow, hang on, let me stick that one on my star chart. Yeah. Golly, I should also put a star chart on for saying the word golly the greatest number of times in a single podcast. That one's on my mind today for some reason. Great to talk to you, man.
All right, everybody, thank you so much. We'll talk to you next week.
Toodaloo.